Good morning, everybody. Hope you all had a great night last night. So we're going to have a very short conversation today about Julian's journey, and you can tell that the commonality between us is youth entrepreneurship, and we're going to dive a little bit into what today's young entrepreneurs need and what we can learn, and also how we can support young entrepreneurs in their journey, and also a little bit about his startup. So you're from Germany. You studied in Germany, and then you went to MIT, and then you were at Cambridge. And tell us a little bit more about your whole academic journey and what got you to do that, and then we'll dive a little bit more into your startup and how that all began.
Is my microphone working? Yeah, it is. Okay, perfect. Delighted to be here. So my story is I grew up in this tiny rural town here in Bavaria, and my parents were teachers, so I was like very far removed from the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem. And but from a very young age on, I was super interested in tech and competed in a lot of youth science competitions, and it was really clear to me that I would want to study computer science. So after graduating from high school as one of the best students in Bavaria, I did, but first started off here in Germany and then went to Cambridge. But the really pivotal moment for me was actually going to the US, because before I would have never even dreamt of doing my own startup directly after university. And I always want to have impact, so I did a lot of voluntary work for organizations such as the German Academic Exchange Service and high school politics and so on. But here in Germany, I don't know, we are instilled with this belief that you first have to do your bachelor's, then your master's, then your PhD, and then ideally even have a few years of work experience, and then maybe you can think about doing a startup. And then when I went to MIT, after a couple of days, I actually met a German fellow, and I asked him, "Oh, what do you want to do after your research stay here?" And he told me, "I want to move to California and build a startup." And back then, I was thinking, "Oh, he's crazy. He must be hallucinating."
How old were you? How old were you back then?
I was 23, and when I spent more time in this Harvard-MIT ecosystem, I saw a lot of instances of people, of students even younger than me, who just dropped out, moved to SF, and started the startup. And of course, in some cases, it failed. And this is like one of many examples where the system is completely different to Europe. Even after 1.5 years of trying the startup, people could just go back to Harvard or MIT and continue their studies, whereas in Germany, if you would do the same, they would throw you out of your university program, and then, basically you would be without a degree, and that's, not the easiest way to get into the workforce here.
For sure.
But there were also examples of those young founders who became super successful, and actually the people I've met there have now started the most successful AI startups in this era of startups. So for instance, I met the people who did Anysphere. Maybe you've heard of Cursor or Etched or Merkur, who now became the youngest billionaires, even younger than Mark Zuckerberg. And that really convinced me. And I realized, hey, instead of accepting my PhD offer at Cambridge in computer science, let's just go to California and give it a try.
That's the spirit. And I would love to dive a bit into that whole Europe versus US conversation, but before that, because we're talking about engineering attention, right? So what's the story of your startup, and why are we talking about engineering attention?
Yeah, so of course, probably most of you, like this whole AI era was started by the famous paper about the transformer architecture. Attention is all you need. So it's hinting at that. But then basically, we are doing the next big AI consumer product. And the idea is that you have kind of a second brain, that you can imagine having a younger colleague who's like just following you around 24/7, looking across your shoulder, watching at your screen, and then of course learning who you are in contact with, like what problems you are working on, do you split them into smaller tasks, and then how do you solve those tasks, like identifying your individual workflows, and of course, like also the domain knowledge you have, because that's what the big models, they can't do. They don't have the domain knowledge. And so we are trying to really pay attention to the consumer, learn about him, deliver a very personalized experience, which is something the big app ChatGPT can't do right now. And yeah, that's what we do.
So when Julia and I spoke, I immediately thought of this image of having a second brain that just has all of your memory and all of your information and tracking what you're doing. And I like to think of it as my subconscious. Sometimes I think, oh, I totally forgot this. It's not in my memory. I wish I could just access my subconscious and know what I did at that point in time. And what you're building is essentially that, right?
It's that and even more, because like we were inspired by this tool called Rewind, which basically did 24/7 screen recording, and then you could do like just basically scroll back in time and really look at what you've done in the past on your laptop, which is useful if you want to look, for instance, let's say you've been reading a post on X or reading a paper, and you can remember the general topic, but of course our long-term memory is not perfect, so you could just like do a keyword search and then look at what has happened at that moment. And like there were so many people loving that product and paying for that product, and we thought that's super cool, but let's build a layer on top, an AI layer on top. And I mean, that's what computer science is about, right? Abstraction, like using existing technology to build like the next layer that has even more capabilities. Yeah, and that's what we do.
Perfect. Can you just give one or two examples of some really cool functions?
Okay, so I've basically brought up this example of like having this image of the younger colleague in your mind, right? And first of all, and that's a difference to, let's say, ChatGPT. First of all, ChatGPT is very, it only reacts if you prompt it, right? And a younger colleague is much more proactive. So our program can proactively do actions for you. And then, of course, you can also give tasks to your younger colleague, and which keeps you basically accountable. So you could tell your younger colleague, hey, whenever in the late afternoon I get distracted, I'm doom scrolling on LinkedIn or on X, please tell me, get back to work, get back to what I've been previously doing. And that's something our agent could do, because he sees exactly, he has now spent this amount of time on something that is distracting. He knows what you've been doing before and what your tasks are at the moment, and it would tell you, please get back to work.
Perfect. So you guys are still in stealth, but for anybody interested in investing, I think this is a good one.
We are right now not looking for money, but
eventually you will be looking for money. So we have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to touch on that whole Europe versus Silicon Valley conversation, because in Sigma Squared I see that a lot. So we're a global network of over 1,000 of the most ambitious young founders in the world, with over 35 countries, almost all continents. And we see that the moment founders go from, say, Germany or even the UK to Silicon Valley, they really go like this. I mean, we have a lot of founders that go through Y Combinator and get funding from some of those investors there. And I've also been part of conversations here in Europe and Germany, and we even did a project with the Bertelsmann Stiftung in Germany to understand what the obstacles are that are preventing founders in, say, Germany from reaching a similar stage, right? So what's been your experience? You touched a bit on that, but what have you been getting in Silicon Valley or in the States that you just weren't getting here? And that could be a nice call to action for all of us to try to provide more of that to founders.
Yeah, sure. So I already said I would have never even had the idea of doing a startup here, but even at this point, I would never start a company in Germany or the EU, because it's just so different. And honestly, it's a bit sad. But I would say, like, of course, there are the obvious differences. So, for instance, just like access to funding, but then, like, even more important, I would say, access to talent. Because in the end, like, San Francisco is just this mecca for tech talent. It's like, in my mind, I always think of it like what, Florence was during the Renaissance, SF is during the AI era, because like all the innovation is taking place there. Like, it's a super tight network. Ideas are just exchanged very fast, and this produces a lot of output, and all the interesting people are there. And of course, if you are working on those moonshot ideas, and that's another problem, people in Germany, if they want to work on AI, and especially right now with chaos and like international politics, Europe wants more startups. It wants to be leading in AI. But what you see is that people end up working on AI for logistics and supply chains, but not on the big moonshot ideas. And how is Europe supposed to end up with the new Google, the new Apple, the new Instagram, if you work on those, like, very specific, narrow ideas? So I think you should be more open to that. And of course, it's super hard to change the culture. But then on the other hand, things like having this ecosystem of like all the investors willing to take a bet, willing to invest a lot of money, to be able to also pay the talent you need to follow like those big ideas. So for instance, in our case, we have people from universities like Stanford, Cambridge, ETH, TUM, and who graduated top of their class and had offers from other firms, quant trading firms, who honestly would pay them even more, like huge sums, and they are, of course, like believing in the mission, so taking a pay cut, but still, they want to see some money, and you get that only if you're going to the Bay. And I would say in Germany, to create, to make young people go into entrepreneurship, and to inspire them, I think having organizations where young, talented people can meet and exchange ideas are super important. So, for instance, here in Munich, they already did a pretty good job at having such organizations such as CDTM or the Bavarian Elite Academy or Manage and More. And I think, of course, TUM and LMU are good universities, but Germany is not as centralized as, for instance, the US regarding the universities. And there's a lot of good talent also at other universities. And I think it's important that, for instance, those programs are replicated and would also take place at those other universities. But yeah, there's 1,000 things that should be changed.
So if Germany engineered their attention better when it comes to startup culture, what is one thing that Germany or people here can do to get you back from the Bay Area to Germany?
That would be hard, but yeah, to get me back, I don't see a direct way. But for new companies, I would say, first of all, provide more flexibility for people at university, and then give them a chance, even if it sounds unlikely. I mean, venture capital is not about the 9 out of 10 who fail, but about the one idea that really gets big. And I think that's an important point where especially the mindset of investors here in Europe still has to change in comparison to the US.
Great. Thank you very much, Julian Windeck.
Thank you.